Hi, welcome to another episode of MYD Global. I'm your host, Leanne Hackman-Carty. In today's episode, I'm speaking with James Ellsmoor. James organized the first online virtual island summit in 2019, and he's about to organize another one this year in 2020 in September. It's a way to bring together people who are from island communities that really care about how to be more resilient, how to prepare, how to recover from disasters, and really talk about the issues that are important to them. So stay tuned as I talk to James about what he's preparing and how you can get involved. Hey, James, good to see you today. How are you?
Hi, Leanne. Thanks for having me. Doing great, thank you.
Good. Well, before we get started, can you just explain a little bit about your background?
Yeah, for sure. So my name's James Ellsmoor. I'm director of a company called Island Innovation from the UK originally. Have lived in the US for a while and currently based in Colombia, South America. Have a bit of a background in renewable energy and now work on more broadly sustainable development issues, particularly interested in rural, remote and island locations.
Well, one of the things I know that you and I wanted to talk about today is your island, your virtual island summit. I think last year was the first year you did it, and it's coming up in September 2020. And just curious if you can give a little background about why you started it, who participated, those kinds of things.
Yeah, so the virtual summit concept is not a new one, and actually in digital marketing has been used really widely. And so I'd followed kind of conversations in the digital marketing sphere while also being involved in the sustainable development sphere. And they're about as far away in terms of circles as they can be from each other. And so I really just saw the potential of using this concept to bring people together and really use it as an educational advancement tool. I think there was a lot of traction with the kind of Greta Thunberg no-fly movement, particularly people working in environment and climate change, wanting to find alternatives. But to be honest, that was not the initial motivation for starting. Obviously, it's nice to have a low-carbon conference, and we definitely push that. But actually, the opportunity to have inclusivity and make information available was really the motivation. And so I've had the opportunity to work in the Caribbean, in the Pacific, in the Scottish Islands, a little bit with some of the Canadian islands as well. And, I really just saw the commonalities between these very different communities dealing with issues like high cost of energy, difficulty of disposing waste, brain drain, transport links, et cetera, et cetera. And so there was a lot of opportunity to kind of build those digital bridges, as I like to say. We were able to have panels on topics ranging from electric vehicles to waste disposal to journalism for small islands. And the advantage of doing a virtual summit is that we weren't biased towards one particular location. And so you can have a panel with a speaker from Prince Edward Island, from Jamaica, from Malta, and from Fiji, four very different places, but on some topics dealing with the same issues and grappling with them. So it was about showing good case studies, good examples, sharing learning, and trying to avoid reinventing the wheel over and over again.
And so how many people participated in your inaugural one last year?
So last year we had 4,000 participants sign up overall. Now we had 27 sessions spread out over a week. So on the average session, we had between 100 and 200 people joining in. And then all of those sessions were made available on recording as well. So not necessarily all of those people were joining every session. We were aiming at a wide range of stakeholders. So as well as kind of bridging island communities, we were also encouraging governments, private sector, electric utilities, NGOs, universities, etc., trying to break down barriers between those, because again, often they are working on very similar issues, but doing it in silo. And so I think we were quite successful at engaging this wide range of stakeholders. And I think we had over 200 islands represented from all over the world, plus other interested people joining from places that weren't islands at all. So it was a really diverse audience. And this year we're aiming to reach 10,000 people signed up from all over the world, and pretty confident that we'll be able to reach that.
That's awesome, because I know I've done some work with islands, and they're somewhat unique. I mean, first of all, they experienced the disaster, but then I think of a place like Puerto Rico. I was there in November, and they told me that I think it's 90% of their food source it's
Yeah.
imported. And so you think, okay, so if a hurricane hits the port that's bringing you the food, and then you don't get your food, how long
Yeah.
can you go without having that food security? That becomes a major issue. So, not only are they vulnerable to a natural disaster, but the impacts after, for sure. It's like, how do you
Uh,
work with your lumber to rebuild your homes and your food and your vehicles? Like, all of that is compounded when you're an island.
yeah, so actually I just came back from Puerto Rico on Monday. I was there for a resiliency and climate event last week. And that's obviously a very interesting case study given the difficulties, and they're still recovering from the hurricane this year, of having earthquakes, and again shows how all these things interlink. The food supply absolutely vital, and that applies to across the Caribbean. I mean, two things I was going to say there. One, on these small islands, the difficulty of a disaster, particularly for countries, you can have the entire GDP of a whole country wiped out in one evening. If you're talking about some of the smaller islands, Saint Lucia, Dominica is a good example that was hit around the same time. And if Canada or the US is hit and one county is really badly damaged, there's kind of a hinterland that can come in and support that can be used. But when it's an entire country, it's quite a different perspective. And you do see, I think, 200, 300% of annual GDP destroyed overnight. So I think that's a special case for many of these small island developing states. And then on the food side, that's an issue for islands across the world. I mean, it would be just as relevant in Nunavut, in the Pacific Islands, in the Caribbean. And there's consequences around disasters, around bringing things in, and there's consequences around non-communicable diseases and the diabetes rates. I mean, 9 of the 10 most obese countries in the world are Pacific Islands, and that's because they partly because they depend entirely on, well, not entirely, but depend mostly on imported foods. And so all of these things very much interlink with each other, and the difficulties of creating a local sustainable agriculture system is one commonality that we're trying to share information on.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's an incredibly complicated field, really, because it's disasters hit, and sometimes the second disaster hits after trying to recover, and in these cases it's just so much more difficult. The logistics around getting product to and from these islands it just magnifies the issue. So from the summit that is coming up, as far as topics, are you looking at specific buckets, kind of streams of topics, or what's your hope as to what that?
Yeah, because for me the topic is islands, which can be very broad and depends on the angle you're coming in. Because of my background, we had quite a lot of energy topics last year. Things like waste, agriculture, transportation. We've just agreed to have a specific session on ferry transportation and looking at the electrification of ferry systems, for example. One very specific topic is the impact of Brexit on overseas territories of the United Kingdom, places like Bermuda and the Turks and Caicos and the Falkland Islands, which have been impacted. So it spans, I mean, there's definitely a kind of a route in the sustainable development area, but it spans the economic, political, social issues that are common to many different places. We'll have the final agenda for the September summit out around June. Still working on confirming speakers, and encourage people who are interested in the topic and have ideas. There's a box on the website that you can submit your ideas or speaker suggestions through as well, and definitely open to thoughts on that.
That's great. Well, I will include in the video below the description on how people can register and learn more about the summit. And I know I've signed up already, and I look forward to it. And I hopefully those watching will also take the time to register and get great content on best practices that's happening, especially if they are island communities and facing these kinds of challenges. So is there anything else you want to say before we wrap up, James?
No, thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate that. And we'll just add, even if you're not from an island community, I think many of the topics will be relevant across the board. So we'd really encourage people to join in, see what sessions will be interested for them. And if you, the tickets are free, should add. So it's completely free to attend. And that's part of our commitment to accessibility. We want grassroots groups that are really doing things on the ground to be able to access this information. And so if you sign up, we'll send updates as the information comes out between now and September.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time today, James, and stay in touch.
Thanks so much, Leanne.
Okay, bye-bye.